My name is Elena Rivera. I'm 31 years old. For 3 decades, I lived as my mother's emotional prisoner. But today, I'm finally free, and she has no idea what's coming. You think you know your parents? You think blood means loyalty? You think family protects family. I thought that too, until I discovered the truth about the woman who raised me. Until I realized that some people are born broken, and they spend their entire lives breaking everyone around them. My story begins the day my father died. But really, it started 20 years before that, when I was 11 years old and learned to hide a tape recorder in my backpack. Let me tell you about Margaret Rivera, my mother. Beautiful, charming, intelligent, the kind of woman who could convince a room full of strangers that she was perfect within minutes. She had this laugh, melodic, infectious. People loved her immediately. They never saw what happened when the doors closed and the audience disappeared. Behind those doors, she was a different person entirely. My father, David, was a quiet man. He owned a successful construction company, built it from nothing with his bare hands and relentless work ethic. He was gentle, patient, the kind of father who taught you how to ride a bike by running alongside you until you found your balance. He was also weak when it came to her. Margaret controlled everything. What we ate, what we wore, who we talked to, where we went. She monitored my phone calls, read my diary, chose my friends. She convinced my father this was normal parenting. She convinced him I was difficult, rebellious, that I needed firm guidance. But I wasn't rebellious. I was terrified. When I was 11, Margaret found a note I'd written to my friend Sarah, complaining about how strict my mother was. Nothing dramatic. Just typical kid stuff about not being allowed to sleep over at friends' houses. Margaret read it aloud at dinner, her voice dripping with mock hurt. "Elena thinks I'm too controlling," she said, dabbing her eyes with a napkin. "I sacrifice everything for this family, and this is how she thanks me." My father immediately took her side. "Elena, apologize to your mother." I apologized. I always apologized. That night, Margaret came into my room. She sat on the edge of my bed, stroking my hair with gentle fingers. To anyone watching, it would have looked loving, maternal. "You embarrassed me today," she whispered. "You made me look like a bad mother in front of your father. Do you know how that felt?" I shook my head. "It felt like you were trying to destroy our family. Is that what you want? To break apart our happy home?" "No, Mom." "Good. Because if you ever try to turn your father against me again, if you ever make me look bad again, I'll make sure he knows exactly what kind of daughter he really has. Do you understand?" I understood. She was telling me that she could manipulate him against me anytime she wanted. And she was right. From that night forward, I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I noticed how she changed when different people were around, how she played victim when she needed sympathy, played the perfect mother when she needed admiration, played the concerned wife when she needed my father's protection. I noticed how she isolated me from anyone who might see through her act, how she poisoned my relationships before they could deepen, how she made me doubt my own perceptions, my own memories, my own sanity. By the time I was 15, I realized my mother was a master manipulator. By the time I was 18, I understood she was something much worse. A woman who enjoyed inflicting psychological pain on those who couldn't fight back. But I wasn't a helpless child anymore. I was learning, adapting, planning. College was my escape. I got into Northwestern on a full scholarship, something Margaret couldn't argue against, though she tried. "It's so far away," she said. "How will we know you're safe? How will you manage without family support?" What she really meant was, "How will I control you from 300 miles away?" I studied psychology and business, devouring every book about narcissistic personality disorder, emotional abuse, legal rights. I wasn't just getting an education. I was building an arsenal. I came home for holidays, summer breaks. Each visit was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Margaret had refined her techniques over the years. She was subtler now, more sophisticated. She'd learned to frame her cruelty as concern, her control as love. She'd tell my father things like, "I'm worried about Elena. She seems so distant lately, so cold. I wonder if being away at school is changing her." Always in my presence, always with that perfectly calibrated tone of maternal worry. She'd give me the silent treatment for days. Then when I finally asked what was wrong, She'd say with wounded eyes, "I'm just giving you the space you seem to want. I don't want to be controlling." She was brilliant at it. Absolutely brilliant. But I was learning too. During my junior year, I came home for Christmas break. Margaret had redecorated my room without asking, painted over the walls I'd carefully chosen, replaced furniture I'd saved for with generic pieces from a catalog. When I expressed disappointment, she turned to my father with tears in her eyes. I spent weeks planning this surprise for her. I thought she'd love it. I was so excited to show her. That night, I went to my father's study. He was reviewing construction plans, glasses perched on his nose, looking every bit the gentle man I remembered from childhood. "Dad," I said carefully, "can I talk to you about something?" He looked up, smiled. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" "It's about Mom." His expression immediately shifted. Guarded, protective. "What about her?" I had rehearsed this conversation in my head 100 times. I knew I had one chance to plant a seed of doubt without triggering his defensive instincts. "I know she loves me," I began. "I know she means well. But sometimes I feel like I can't do anything right around her. Like no matter what I do, I'm disappointing her somehow." My father's face softened. "Elena, your mother loves you more than anything in the world. She worries about you. That's what mothers do." "I know, Dad. I'm not saying she doesn't love me. I'm just saying maybe we have different ways of showing love, and maybe sometimes those differences create misunderstandings." It was perfectly neutral, completely non-threatening. I wasn't attacking Margaret or asking him to choose sides. I was simply suggesting that communication styles might be different, but even that was too much. "Your mother has sacrificed everything for this family," he said firmly. "Everything. She gave up her own career to focus on raising you, on supporting my business. She manages our entire household, our social obligations, our family relationships. The least we can do is appreciate her efforts." I nodded, understanding that the conversation was over, understanding that Margaret's programming ran deeper than I'd realized. But I also understood something else. My father wasn't just blind to Margaret's true nature. He was actively invested in not seeing it. Because seeing it would mean acknowledging that his entire marriage was built on a lie. It would mean admitting that he'd failed to protect his daughter from psychological abuse. It would mean facing the reality that the woman he loved was capable of deliberate cruelty. Some truths are too devastating to accept, so people choose comfortable lies instead. That's when I decided to stop trying to save my father from Margaret. Instead, I would save myself, and I would make sure that when the truth finally came out, there would be no denying it. I started keeping detailed records. Every conversation, every incident, every example of Margaret's manipulative behavior. I documented dates, times, witnesses when possible. I learned about recording laws in our state, one-party consent, which meant I could legally record conversations as long as I was present. I bought a small digital recorder, so tiny it could fit in my palm. During family dinners, holiday gatherings, any time I was alone with Margaret, I recorded everything. The first time I played back one of those recordings, I sat in my dorm room with headphones on, listening to my own voice apologize to my mother for things I hadn't done. Listening to her expert manipulation, the way she twisted my words, reframed my intentions, made me doubt my own reality. It was like watching a magic trick in slow motion, finally understanding how the illusion worked. By my senior year, I had dozens of recordings, hundreds of pages of documentation. A complete psychological profile of Margaret Rivera built from 20 years of lived experience and 4 years of academic study. I also had something else, a relationship with my father that Margaret couldn't touch. Once a month, I called him at his office to talk about business. I was majoring in business administration with a focus on construction management, and he loved sharing industry insights with me. These conversations were sacred to him, professional, intellectual, father-daughter bonding that had nothing to do with domestic dynamics. During these calls, I learned about his company's finances, his future plans, his values around hard work and fairness. I learned that he was proud of building something from nothing, proud of providing for his family, proud of creating jobs for other people. I also learned that he was deeply concerned about what would happen to the business when he was gone. Your mother doesn't understand construction. He told me during one of our calls. She's brilliant at managing our personal life, but business is different. It requires someone who understands the industry, the relationships, the day-to-day operations. What about hiring a management company? I suggested. I've thought about that, but this company is my legacy, Alina. It's what I'm leaving behind. I want it to be in hands that will honor what I built. That's when I knew. Margaret might control our family dynamics, but she couldn't control my father's business instincts. And his business instincts told him that the company needed someone who understood construction, not someone who understood manipulation. I graduated summa cum laude and immediately enrolled in a master's program focused on construction management and business law. My father was thrilled. Margaret was less enthusiastic. "Don't you think you've been away from family long enough?" she asked during my graduation dinner. "Don't you want to come home and start a real life?" What she meant was, "Don't you think it's time to come back where I can control you?" "I want to learn everything I can about Dad's industry," I replied. "I want to be able to help with the business someday." My father beamed with pride. Margaret's smile was tight, calculated. That night, she cornered me in the kitchen while my father was on a business call. "I know what you're doing," she said quietly. "What am I doing, Mom?" "You're trying to position yourself as his business successor. You're trying to cut me out." Her mask had slipped, just for a moment. The loving mother was gone, replaced by something cold and predatory. "I'm trying to learn about his work," I said calmly, "because I love him and I'm interested in what he does." "Don't lie to me, Alina. I've been watching you. I know how your mind works. You think you're smarter than me, don't you?" "I think I'm his daughter who wants to understand his career." She stepped closer, lowering her voice to barely a whisper. "Let me make something very clear. This family has a hierarchy. Your father and I are at the top. You are not. You will never be. And if you try to change that dynamic, if you try to manipulate him against me, I will destroy you so completely that you'll beg me to forgive you." I looked into her eyes and saw something that made my blood freeze. Pure, calculated malice. This wasn't passionate anger or defensive fear. This was the cold fury of a predator whose territory was being threatened. But I also felt something else, relief. Because finally, she had dropped the mask completely, and the digital recorder in my pocket had captured every word. "I understand, Mom," I said softly. "I'll remember what you said." I would remember. Everything. 2 weeks later, I started my master's program. 6 months after that, my father had his first heart attack. The illness years. My father's heart attack changed everything. Not because it made Margaret kinder. If anything, it made her more dangerous. But because it gave her the perfect cover for total control. David Rivera was 58 when his heart stopped beating in his office on a Tuesday afternoon in March. His foreman, Miguel Santos, found him collapsed over his desk, architectural plans scattered around his unconscious body. Miguel called 911, then called Margaret, then called me. I was in the middle of a contract law seminar when my phone buzzed with Margaret's call. I almost didn't answer. She rarely called me directly, preferring to communicate through my father. "Elena." Her voice was shaking, tears evident. "You need to come home. It's your father." The 2-hour drive from Northwestern to Oak Brook felt like 20 hours. I called the hospital from the road, demanding updates that the nurses couldn't legally give me. I called Miguel, who told me in broken English that my father looked peaceful when the paramedics took him away. "He worked too hard," Miguel said. "Always worry about everything. But he tough man. He be okay." I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. When I arrived at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Margaret was in the cardiac ICU waiting room, surrounded by concerned neighbors and business associates. She looked devastated, face pale, eyes red from crying, hands shaking as she accepted coffee from well-meaning friends. The performance was flawless. "Elena!" She rushed to embrace me, and for a moment, surrounded by witnesses, she felt like the mother I'd always wished she could be. Warm, protective, genuinely emotional. "How is he?" I asked. "Stable," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "But it was close, honey. So close. The doctors say the next 48 hours are critical." Over the next 2 days, I watched Margaret orchestrate the crisis with military precision. She managed the flow of visitors, coordinated with the medical team, handled calls from business associates and family friends. She was efficient, compassionate, completely in control. She was also systematically cutting me out of every important decision. When I tried to speak with my father's cardiologist, I was told that only his wife could receive medical updates. When I attempted to sit with him during visiting hours, Margaret explained that too many people in the room would overwhelm him. When I suggested we take shifts so someone could always be there, she assured me that she had everything handled. "You should focus on your studies," she said with perfect maternal concern. "Your father would want you to keep up with school. I'll call you the moment anything changes." But things were changing. I could see it in the way hospital staff deferred to her completely, in how business associates directed all their questions to her, and how she was slowly becoming the official voice of David Rivera. My father survived the heart attack, but his recovery was complicated. Bypass surgery, months of rehabilitation, strict limitations on physical activity and stress. The construction company had to be managed remotely while he focused on healing. This was Margaret's moment. The time she'd been waiting for without even realizing it. "David needs complete rest," she announced to everyone who would listen. "No business stress, no difficult decisions, no worrying about day-to-day operations." The doctors were very clear about this. She hired a management company to oversee the construction business, positioning herself as the intermediary between my father and the company operations. Every major decision flowed through her. Every report was filtered through her interpretation. Every problem was either handled by her directly or deemed too stressful for David to worry about right now. Within 6 months, Margaret Rivera had become the de facto CEO of Rivera Construction. My father, meanwhile, was struggling with depression and anxiety, common after major cardiac events, his doctors explained. He was withdrawn, easily fatigued, quick to defer to Margaret's judgment about everything from medical appointments to business decisions. "I trust your mother completely," he told me during one of my visits home. "She's handling everything so I can focus on getting better." He looked smaller somehow, diminished. The vital, confident man who had built a construction empire was gone, replaced by someone who seemed grateful to let others make his decisions. I wanted to believe this was temporary, that as his physical health improved, his emotional strength would return, that he would eventually reclaim control of his life and his business. But Margaret had other plans. She began subtly undermining his confidence in his own judgment. When he expressed interest in returning to work part-time, she would remind him of his limitations. "Remember what the doctor said about stress, honey. Remember how tired you get after just a few hours of activity." When he questioned decisions about the business, she would present them as medical necessities. "I know you want to be involved, but your health has to come first. We can't risk another heart attack." When he showed signs of his old decisiveness, she would frame it as concerning behavior. "David seems agitated lately. I'm worried he's pushing himself too hard. Maybe we should talk to his cardiologist about adjusting his medications." It was masterful psychological manipulation, disguised as loving care. I watched this transformation during my monthly visits home, documenting everything, recording conversations when possible. I was building a case, though I wasn't sure yet what kind of case it would be. During my father's second year of recovery, I approached him about estate planning. "Dad, have you and Mom updated your wills recently? With everything that's happened, it might be good to review your wishes." His face immediately became uncomfortable. "Your mother handles all of that now. She's much better at the paperwork side of things." "But it's your will, Dad, your decisions about your assets." "Elena, I trust your mother's judgment completely. She knows what's best for our family." That conversation terrified me more than his heart attack had, because I realized that Margaret wasn't just controlling his day-to-day decisions. She was shaping his understanding of his own wishes and values. I decided I needed professional help. Dr. Sarah Chen was a forensic psychologist who specialized in cases involving elder abuse and coercive control. I found her through my academic research, and I approached her carefully, presenting my concerns as hypothetical case studies for my thesis work. Hypothetically, I said during our first consultation, if someone wanted to gradually gain control over another person's decision-making capacity, how might they go about it? Dr. Chen studied me carefully. That's a very specific question for academic research. I'm interested in legal protections for vulnerable adults, I said, which was technically true. She spent the next hour explaining the psychology of coercive control, the techniques used to undermine someone's confidence and autonomy, the legal challenges involved in proving such manipulation. The most dangerous controllers, she explained, are those who operate under the guise of care and protection. They create dependency while appearing to provide support. They isolate their targets while seeming to shield them from stress. They make all the decisions while framing it as helping their victim avoid difficult choices. She could have been describing Margaret's playbook word for word. Hypothetically, I continued, what kind of evidence would be needed to prove this kind of manipulation? Documentation is crucial. Medical records showing cognitive decline that doesn't match the person's actual mental capacity. Financial records showing sudden changes in decision-making patterns. Recorded conversations demonstrating the controlling behavior. Testimony from witnesses who knew the person before and after the manipulation began. I thought about my growing collection of recordings, my detailed notes, my careful observations of my father's transformation. And what if the victim doesn't recognize they're being manipulated? What if they defend their controller? Dr. Chen's expression grew grave. That's the most insidious aspect of psychological abuse. The victim becomes psychologically dependent on their abuser. They lose trust in their own judgment and begin to see their controller as their protector. Breaking that dynamic requires careful intervention and often legal action. After 6 months of consultations with Dr. Chen, I had a clear understanding of what Margaret was doing to my father and how to potentially stop it. But I also understood the challenges ahead. My father wasn't going to thank me for exposing Margaret's manipulation. He was going to see it as an attack on the woman who had sacrificed everything to care for him during his illness. He was going to resist any intervention that threatened his newfound dependency. But I also knew something else. My father's construction company was his life's work, his legacy, his pride. And Margaret was systematically dismantling it under the guise of protecting his health. The management company she'd hired was competent but uninspired. They were maintaining operations but not growing the business, not pursuing new opportunities, not nurturing the relationships my father had spent decades building. They were bleeding away his legacy drop by drop while he focused on his recovery. That's when I decided to apply for a job at Rivera Construction. I had finished my master's degree with a focus on construction, management, and business law. I had excellent grades, relevant internship experience, and a genuine understanding of the industry. On paper, I was a qualified candidate for a project management position. I applied under my maiden name, Elena Reyes, using my mother's maiden name to avoid immediate recognition. During the interview process, I presented myself as a recent graduate looking to build a career in construction management. The management company hired me without realizing my connection to the Rivera family. For 6 months, I worked as a project manager at my father's company, learning the business from the inside, building relationships with long-term employees, understanding the financial structure and operational challenges. I also discovered what Margaret had been hiding from my father. Rivera Construction was struggling, not catastrophically, but steadily declining. The management company was risk-averse, turning down potentially profitable projects that required innovation or significant coordination. They were maintaining existing client relationships, but not developing new ones. They were paying themselves substantial management fees while allowing the company's competitive position to erode. My father's life's work was slowly dying, and Margaret was making sure he never knew about it. The employees knew, though. Miguel Santos, my father's longtime foreman, approached me after I'd been there for 3 months. "You work different than others," he said carefully. "You understand construction, like Mr. Rivera. You care about quality, like him." We were reviewing plans for a residential project that the management company wanted to execute using cheaper materials and faster timelines. I had suggested alternatives that would maintain quality while staying within budget, approaches that required more planning but would result in better outcomes. Mr. Rivera, he teach me that reputation is everything, Miguel continued. Good work brings more good work, but new managers, they only think about money now, not reputation. What does Mr. Rivera think about the changes? I asked carefully. Miguel's face grew sad. Mr. Rivera, he not come to work anymore. His wife, she say he too sick to worry about business. But I think he just don't know what happening here. That conversation changed everything, because I realized that Margaret wasn't just manipulating my father. She was actively concealing information that would have motivated him to reclaim control of his business. If he knew Rivera Construction was declining, if he understood that his life's work was being mismanaged, if he saw the financial reports and employee concerns, his protective instincts would override his health fears. But Margaret was making sure he never saw any of that information. I spent the next 3 months carefully documenting the company's decline, building relationships with key employees, and developing a comprehensive recovery plan that would restore Rivera Construction to its former strength. I also continued recording my interactions with Margaret during family visits, building a detailed record of her controlling behavior and emotional manipulation. By the time my father had his second heart attack, I was ready. The second cardiac event was minor, more of a warning than a crisis. But Margaret used it as justification for even tighter control. The doctors say stress is literally killing him, she announced to family and friends. Any business concerns, any family drama, any difficult decisions could trigger another attack. We have to protect him from everything that might upset him. She moved him to a private room in their house, monitored his phone calls, screened his visitors, and controlled all information coming in or going out. She also began talking about the future in ways that terrified me. David may never be able to handle business decisions again, she confided to my aunt during a family dinner that I attended. The doctors say cognitive decline is common after multiple cardiac events. He's just not the same man he used to be. My father was sitting right there, looking confused and diminished, not contradicting her assessment of his mental capacity. That night, I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to expose Margaret's manipulation, rescue my father from her psychological control, and save Rivera Construction from systematic destruction. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was up against. I hired a private investigator to research Margaret's background, her financial activities, and her legal vulnerabilities. I consulted with an attorney who specialized in elder abuse cases. I worked with Dr. Limo Chen to develop an intervention strategy that would maximize my chances of success while minimizing trauma to my father. What I discovered in the months that followed would have shocked me if I hadn't already lived through 28 years of Margaret's psychological warfare. She hadn't just been manipulating my father since his heart attack. She had been systematically planning to take control of his assets for years, possibly decades. The Caring Wife Act wasn't just about controlling him. It was about positioning herself to inherit everything he had built, and she was much closer to success than I had realized. The discovery. The private investigator I hired was a woman named Janet Pierce, 50-something, former police detective specializing in financial fraud and domestic investigations. She was thorough, discreet, and expensive, worth every penny. I need you to investigate my mother, I told her during our first meeting at a coffee shop near Northwestern. But she can't know about it, and neither can my father. Janet studied me with sharp eyes. What kind of investigation? Financial activities, background verification, any legal issues or inconsistencies. I think she's been manipulating my father, and I need proof. That's a serious accusation. What makes you think she's manipulating him? I spent an hour explaining the situation. My father's illness, Margaret's increasing control, the business decline, the psychological manipulation I'd witnessed over the years. Janet took notes, asked pointed questions, and finally nodded. I've seen cases like this before. Financial predators who target vulnerable adults, often family members. They create dependence while positioning themselves to inherit assets. It's more common than people realize. Can you prove it if it's happening? If there's evidence to find, I'll find it. But you need to be prepared for what I might discover. Sometimes the truth is worse than people expect. She was right about that. Janet's investigation took 4 months. When she called to schedule a meeting to review her findings, her voice was grim. We need to talk in person, and you're going to want to record this conversation for your attorney. We met at her office on a gray December afternoon. Janet had prepared a comprehensive report, but she walked me through the highlights first. Let's start with your mother's background, she said, opening a thick folder. Margaret Teresa Walsh, born 1962 in Cleveland, Ohio. Parents died when she was 16, car accident. No siblings. Raised by a great aunt who died when Margaret was 22. That matches what she's always told us. The facts match, but there are gaps, big ones. Between ages 22 and 26, Margaret's whereabouts are unclear. No employment records, no residential history, no documented relationships. She essentially disappears from public records for 4 years. What does that mean? Could mean nothing. Could mean she was living under a different name, possibly married to someone whose records I haven't found. Or it could mean she was incarcerated, though I couldn't find any criminal records under her name. Janet flipped to another section of the report. She resurfaces in Chicago in 1988, working as a receptionist at a law firm. That's where she met your father. They married quickly, 6 months after meeting. You were born 2 years later. So far, nothing unusual. No, but this is where it gets interesting. The law firm where she worked specialized in estate planning and elder law. She worked there for 3 years. Would have learned a lot about wills, trusts, inheritance planning, legal vulnerabilities of elderly clients. A chill ran down my spine. After she married your father and you were born, she never worked outside the home again. But she maintained her interest in legal matters. She's attended numerous seminars on estate planning, elder care, financial management, always positioning herself as the concerned spouse learning to manage family affairs. That sounds like preparation. It gets worse. I found records of 3 other men Margaret had relationships with before your father. All older, all financially stable, all died within a few years of meeting her. My blood went cold. Died how? Natural causes according to death certificates. Heart failure, stroke, cancer. But Elena, the pattern is troubling. In each case, Margaret was the primary beneficiary of their estates. In each case, the men had no close family members to contest the inheritance. In each case, there were concerns raised by friends or distant relatives, but no formal investigations. I stared at Janet, trying to process what she was telling me. Are you saying my mother is a serial killer? I'm saying your mother has a pattern of targeting older, financially stable men who die under circumstances that benefit her significantly. Whether that's coincidence, opportunism, or something more sinister, I can't prove, but the pattern is undeniable. Janet pulled out another set of documents. Now let's talk about your father's finances since his heart attack. Margaret has been systematically reorganizing his assets, always with plausible explanations related to his health and estate planning. She showed me bank records, investment transfers, property deeds, insurance policies. She's moved most of his liquid assets into joint accounts that she controls. She's transferred ownership of real estate properties to a trust that she manages. She's changed beneficiaries on life insurance policies, retirement accounts, business ownership structures. Is that legal? If your father consented to the changes, yes, and according to the paperwork, he signed everything. But look at the timing. Janet had created a timeline showing my father's medical events alongside the financial transactions. Every major asset transfer happened within days of a cardiac episode or medical procedure. When your father was hospitalized, recovering from surgery, dealing with medication changes that affected his mental clarity, she was taking advantage of his vulnerability. It's worse than that. Look at this. Janet showed me medical records that she'd somehow obtained. I didn't ask how. Your father's cognitive function tests show normal results throughout his recovery period. No signs of dementia, no significant mental decline. His cardiologist's notes consistently describe him as mentally sharp and capable of making his own decisions. But Margaret told everyone he was having cognitive issues. Margaret told everyone a lot of things that weren't supported by medical evidence, and she was very careful to be present for every medical appointment, every test, every consultation. She positioned herself as his medical advocate and information filter. The full scope of Margaret's manipulation was becoming clear. She hadn't just been controlling my father's daily life. She had been systematically repositioning herself to inherit his entire estate while convincing everyone, including him, that this was necessary for his well-being. "There's more," Janet continued. "I investigated the management company she hired to run Rivera Construction. On paper, they're legitimate, but they have a history of managing businesses into controlled decline, then facilitating sales to development companies at below-market prices." She's planning to sell my father's company? The preliminary paperwork is already in place. If your father dies or is declared incompetent, the management company has authority to liquidate business assets they deem non-performing. Rivera Construction would be sold, probably to a development company that would demolish the existing structure and build condominiums. Everything my father had built, everyone who depended on Rivera Construction for their livelihood, would be destroyed so Margaret could convert his life's work into liquid assets she could control. Janet, how long do you think she's been planning this? Based on the pattern of her previous relationships and the sophistication of her current strategy, probably since the day she met your father. Maybe longer. I sat in Janet's office, staring at documents that proved my mother was a calculating predator who had spent my entire life positioning herself to destroy my father and steal everything he had worked for. But proof wasn't enough. I needed a strategy that would expose her manipulation, protect my father, and save Rivera Construction, all while dealing with the fact that my father was psychologically dependent on the woman who was systematically betraying him. What do you recommend? I asked Janet. You need a team. A lawyer who specializes in elder abuse and estate fraud. A doctor who can provide independent assessment of your father's mental capacity. A financial advisor who can document the irregularities in asset transfers. And you need to be prepared for war. War? Margaret has spent years building her position. She has medical professionals who defer to her, legal documents that support her authority, and your father's emotional dependence. If you challenge her directly, she'll use every weapon she has against you. She'll claim you're trying to manipulate a sick man, that you're motivated by greed, that you're an ungrateful daughter who's trying to destroy a loving family. Janet was right. Margaret wouldn't go down without a fight, and she was very good at making herself look like the victim. But I had advantages too. I had detailed documentation of her manipulation. I had recordings of her admitting to controlling behavior. I had evidence of the business mismanagement and financial irregularities. I had professional credentials that demonstrated my competence to manage my father's affairs. Most importantly, I had something Margaret didn't expect: patience and strategic thinking inherited from my father, combined with psychological insight gained from years of surviving her abuse. I need you to keep investigating, I told Janet. I want to know everything about her previous relationships, her financial activities, her associates. I want a complete profile of her methods and vulnerabilities. That's going to be expensive. My father's estate is worth several $1,000,000. The construction company generates substantial annual revenue. If I can prove fraud and recover stolen assets, money won't be a problem. Janet smiled grimly. In that case, let me tell you about some other irregularities I found. The next 2 hours were a masterclass in financial fraud. Margaret had been skimming money from my father's accounts for years, always in small amounts that wouldn't trigger automatic alerts. She had opened credit cards in his name, made purchases that benefited her while appearing to be household expenses. She had systematically inflated medical costs, insurance premiums, and household management fees. Conservative estimate, Janet said, she's stolen approximately $200,000 over the past 5 years. But the real prize isn't the theft, it's the inheritance she's positioning herself to claim. Janet showed me the latest version of my father's will, obtained through sources I didn't want to know about. This was updated 6 months ago, while your father was recovering from his second heart attack. Margaret inherits everything, The house, the business, all financial assets, everything. You get a token bequest of $50,000 and some personal items. I stared at the document, my father's signature looking shaky and uncertain at the bottom. But here's what's interesting, Janet continued. I found an earlier version of the will from before his first heart attack. In that version, you inherited the construction company and half of his other assets, with Margaret receiving the house and the remainder. The change represents a swing of approximately $4 million in her favor. Did my father really agree to that change? According to the attorney who drafted it, your father was very clear about his wishes. But the attorney also noted that Margaret was present for all discussions about the will changes, and she was the one who initiated the conversation about updating his estate plan. I thought about my father, weakened by illness, dependent on Margaret for everything from medication management to social interaction, being guided toward decisions that would ultimately destroy his legacy and leave me with nothing. Janet, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Go ahead. Do you think Margaret has been accelerating my father's health problems? Janet was quiet for a long moment. I can't prove anything, but I will say this. Your father's cardiac episodes have been remarkably convenient for Margaret's timeline. Each major asset transfer happened when he was most vulnerable. Each expansion of her legal authority coincided with a health crisis that made him more dependent on her care. You think she's been poisoning him? I think someone should take a very close look at his medical care, his medications, and his unexplained symptoms. I think an independent medical evaluation might reveal some interesting discrepancies. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, processing everything Janet had discovered. My mother wasn't just a narcissistic manipulator. She was a sophisticated criminal who had been planning to rob my father since the day they met. She had isolated him, weakened him, and positioned herself to inherit everything he had worked for while making it look like natural progression of their loving marriage. But she had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated me. Margaret saw me as the difficult daughter who had finally been neutralized by college and career focus. She thought I was safely contained, pursuing my own life while she consolidated control over my father. She had no idea that I had been documenting her abuse for years, building professional relationships that would support my credibility, and developing the legal and psychological expertise needed to expose her fraud. Over the next week, I assembled my team. Attorney Marcus Webb, specializing in elder abuse, estate fraud, and family law. He had successfully prosecuted several cases involving financial exploitation of vulnerable adults. Medical expert, Dr. Patricia Reeves, geriatrician with experience in capacity assessments and medication management. She agreed to conduct an independent evaluation of my father's cognitive function and review his medical history for irregularities. Financial analyst, David Park, forensic accountant who specialized in tracing hidden assets and documenting financial abuse. Psychiatrist, Dr. Sarah Chen, who had been consulting with me throughout the process and was prepared to testify about psychological manipulation and coercive control. Each team member reviewed Janet's investigation report and agreed that the evidence supported a case for elder abuse, financial fraud, and undue influence. The challenge, Marcus explained during our first team meeting, is that Margaret has created a nearly perfect legal facade. On paper, she looks like a devoted wife caring for an ill husband. The asset transfers appear voluntary. The medical decisions seem reasonable. The business management looks responsible. But it's all built on manipulation and fraud, I said. Yes, but proving that requires demonstrating your father's actual mental capacity, his true wishes when not under Margaret's influence, and the systematic nature of her deception. It also requires your father's cooperation, which may be the biggest challenge of all. Dr. Reeves had reviewed my father's medical records and identified several concerning patterns. His medication regimen has been adjusted frequently, often in ways that would affect mental clarity and energy levels. He's been prescribed anti-anxiety medications that can cause confusion and dependency. His cardiac medications have been managed in a way that prioritizes sedation over optimal heart function. Are you saying Margaret has been drugging him? I'm saying his medication management shows signs of being optimized for control rather than healing. A truly independent medical evaluation would be very revealing. David Park had begun tracing the financial irregularities, building a comprehensive picture of Margaret's theft and manipulation. The systematic nature of the fraud is actually helpful for our case, he explained. Random theft might be harder to prove, but this shows clear intent and planning. She's created paper trails that demonstrate ongoing criminal activity. Dr. Chen focused on the psychological aspects of the case. Coercive control is often difficult to prove because it's designed to look like care and protection, but your recordings and documentation show a clear pattern of psychological manipulation designed to undermine your father's autonomy and self-confidence. We spent 2 months preparing our case, gathering additional evidence, and developing a strategy for intervention. The plan was complex but necessary. We would need to simultaneously expose Margaret's fraud, protect my father from retaliation, secure his assets, and restore his psychological independence. The first step was getting my father away from Margaret's influence long enough for an independent medical and psychological evaluation. The opportunity came when Margaret decided to take a spa weekend with her sister, the first time in 2 years that she had left my father alone for more than a few hours. "He'll be fine," she told me when I offered to stay with him during her absence. "The housekeeper will be there, and he mostly just sleeps anyway." He's very weak these days. But when I arrived at their house that Friday evening, my father seemed more alert than I had seen him in months. "Elena." He smiled genuinely for the first time in years. "It's so good to see you, sweetheart. Your mother said you might stop by." We spent the evening talking about my work, his memories of building the construction company, his concerns about the business management. Without Margaret's constant supervision and interpretation, he was sharp, engaged, and clearly frustrated by his lack of involvement in decisions about his own life. "I feel like I'm living in a fog," he admitted. "Like I can't think clearly about anything important. The doctors say it's normal after cardiac events, but I don't feel like myself." "Dad, when was the last time you talked to Miguel or any of the guys from the company?" His face grew sad. "Your mother thinks it's too stressful for me to worry about business matters. She says the management company has everything under control." "But you built that company. Don't you want to know how it's doing?" "Of course I do. But Elena, I can barely handle basic decisions these days. Your mother has to manage my medications, my appointments, my daily schedule. I can't even remember what I'm supposed to do each day." I spent that weekend carefully reintroducing my father to information about his own life. I showed him financial statements, business reports, medical records, all the information Margaret had been filtering or hiding. His reaction was immediate and dramatic. "This can't be right," he said, studying the Rivera Construction financial reports. "These numbers show declining revenue, reduced workforce, canceled contracts. What happened to the Martinez project? The City Hall renovation? The residential development on Oak Street? The management company decided they were too risky or too labor-intensive. Those were our best projects, our most profitable relationships. Elena, this company is dying." I watched my father transform over the course of that weekend. As he absorbed information that had been hidden from him, as he made decisions without Margaret's supervision, as he reconnected with his own values and priorities, he became recognizably himself again. By Sunday evening, he was furious. "Your mother told me the company was doing well," he said. "She said the management company was handling everything perfectly. She said I didn't need to worry about business details." "Dad, I need to tell you some things about Mom that are going to be very difficult to hear." I spent the next 3 hours walking him through Janet's investigation, the evidence of financial fraud, the pattern of manipulation and control. I played him recordings of Margaret's threats and admissions. I showed him documentation of the systematic asset transfers and the changes to his will. My father listened in stunned silence, occasionally asking questions, sometimes requesting to review documents again. When I finished, he sat quietly for several minutes, processing the scope of Margaret's betrayal. "How long have you known?" he finally asked. "I've suspected for years. I've been gathering evidence for months." Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I knew you wouldn't believe me unless you could see it for yourself without her influence, and because I needed to be absolutely certain before I accused her of fraud. My father nodded slowly. You're right. Even now, part of me wants to believe there's some explanation, some misunderstanding, but the evidence is overwhelming. He looked older than his 61 years, exhausted by the revelation that his wife of 30 years had been systematically betraying him. What do we do now? He asked. We take back control of your life. We expose her fraud. We save your company, and we make sure she never has the opportunity to hurt anyone else. She'll fight us. Yes, she will. And she'll try to convince everyone that we're the ones manipulating you, that you're not competent to make these decisions, that I'm an ungrateful daughter motivated by greed. My father was quiet for another long moment. Elena, I need you to know something. I never intended for the will to cut you out of the business inheritance. I don't remember agreeing to those changes. I know, Dad. And I want you to know that I'm proud of you for protecting yourself from her manipulation all these years, for building a career that gave you independence, for having the courage to investigate this situation and bring me the truth. I learned from the best, I said. You taught me that integrity matters more than comfort, that doing the right thing is worth fighting for, even when it's difficult. He smiled, and for the first time in years, it was the smile I remembered from childhood. Then let's fight. The reckoning. Margaret returned from her spa weekend refreshed and unsuspecting. She found my father in his study, reviewing business documents, something he hadn't done in 2 years. David, honey, what are you doing? You know paperwork stresses you out. I'm reviewing the Rivera construction financial reports, he said calmly. Elena brought them by this weekend. I watched Margaret's expression shift from concern to alarm to calculation in the space of 3 seconds. Sweetheart, you know the doctor said you shouldn't worry yourself with business details. Your health has to come first. My health is fine, Margaret, but my business is not. She moved to his side, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, the gesture of a loving wife concerned about her husband's well-being. Let me call Dr. Patterson. I think your medications might need adjusting. You seem agitated. I'm not agitated. I'm informed, and I'm making some changes. Margaret's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and predatory underneath. Then she composed herself, turning to me with perfectly calibrated maternal disappointment. Elena, I asked you not to upset your father with business concerns. His heart can't handle this kind of stress. Actually, Mom, his heart is fine. We had him evaluated by an independent cardiologist yesterday. The lie was strategic. We hadn't arranged the medical evaluation yet, but I wanted to gauge Margaret's reaction to the idea that outside medical professionals might be reviewing my father's case. Her response was immediate and telling. You had no right to take him to another doctor without consulting me. I manage all of his medical care. I coordinate with his treatment team. You could have disrupted his entire treatment protocol. I'm a grown man, Margaret, my father said quietly. I can choose my own doctors. David, you know how confused you get about medical details. Remember when you forgot to take your blood pressure medication for 3 days? Remember when you couldn't remember which specialist was treating what condition? That's why I handle the healthcare coordination. It was masterful manipulation, reminding him of moments of confusion while positioning herself as indispensable, making him doubt his own competence while appearing to protect him from his limitations. But my father had spent the weekend remembering who he was before Margaret's psychological campaign had undermined his confidence. I remember being tired and confused because you were giving me medications that weren't prescribed by my doctors, he said. I remember having trouble thinking clearly because you were managing my schedule so tightly that I never had time to process information independently. Margaret's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. That's not true, David. You're having a paranoid episode. This is exactly what Dr. Patterson warned us about, that recovery from cardiac trauma could include periods of irrational thinking and misplaced anger. She was good, very good. She was using medical terminology to pathologize his resistance to her control, making his legitimate concerns sound like symptoms of mental illness. but I was ready for this. Mom, Dr. Patterson never said anything about paranoid episodes. I have copies of all his notes from Dad's appointments. Would you like me to read them aloud? The threat hung in the air between us. Margaret realized that I had access to information she thought she controlled, that her careful management of my father's medical narrative was compromised. I think we all need to calm down, she said carefully. David, you've had a stressful weekend. Alina, you've clearly upset him with inappropriate business discussions. Let's table this conversation until everyone has had time to rest and think clearly. No, my father said firmly. We're going to finish this conversation now. He stood up from his desk, moving with more energy and purpose than I had seen from him in years. Margaret, I know about the financial transfers. I know about the changes to my will. I know about the management company's mishandling of Rivera Construction, and I know about your history with other men who died leaving you their estates. Margaret went very still. For a moment, the room was completely silent. Then she began to cry. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. Tears flowing, shoulders shaking, the picture of a devastated wife whose husband had turned against her. David, how can you say such horrible things? After everything I've sacrificed for this family? After all the years I've spent caring for you, managing our household, protecting you from stress that could kill you? She turned to me, eyes blazing with perfectly calibrated hurt and anger. This is your doing, isn't it? You've poisoned him against me. You've filled his head with lies and conspiracy theories because you're angry about the inheritance changes. The inheritance changes you made while he was sedated in the hospital? I made those changes because your father asked me to, because he was worried about your financial irresponsibility and wanted to ensure family stability. It was a strategic lie, designed to make my father doubt his own memories while painting me as greedy and manipulative. But my father had heard this manipulation technique too many times over the weekend. We had listened to recordings of Margaret using similar strategies, reviewed documentation of her lies, analyzed her methods with professional expertise. Margaret, stop, he said quietly. Just stop. The tears stopped immediately. The wounded wife expression vanished, replaced by something much more dangerous. You're making a terrible mistake, David. Both of you. You have no idea what I'm capable of when people try to hurt me. There it was. The mask had finally dropped completely, revealing the predator underneath. Actually, we do know what you're capable of, I said. We know about Cleveland. We know about the 3 men before Dad. We know about the insurance fraud and the forged documents. Margaret looked from my father to me, calculating rapidly. She was trapped, and she knew it, but she was far from defeated. You can't prove any of that, she said coldly. And even if you could, it doesn't matter. I've been David's wife for 30 years. I've been his medical advocate, his business manager, his legal representative. I have documentation supporting everything I've done. You have conspiracy theories and family drama. We have recordings of you threatening me and admitting to controlling behavior. We have financial records showing systematic theft. We have medical evidence that Dad's cognitive issues were artificially induced by medication manipulation. Margaret smiled, and it was the most chilling expression I had ever seen. Alina, darling daughter, you've made this much more difficult than it needed to be. I was prepared to let you have your $50,000 and walk away quietly, but now you've forced me to protect myself. She walked to the phone, dialing with practiced ease. Dr. Patterson? This is Margaret Rivera. I need you to come to the house immediately. David is having a severe psychiatric episode. He's making paranoid accusations. He's agitated and irrational, and I'm concerned he might be a danger to himself or others. Yes, I think an involuntary psychiatric hold might be necessary. No, I don't think it's safe to wait until tomorrow. She hung up and turned to us with triumphant satisfaction. David, I'm having you committed for psychiatric evaluation. As your wife and medical power of attorney, I have the legal authority to make that decision. You'll be sedated and hospitalized while doctors determine whether you're competent to make your own decisions. My father went pale. He understood the implications immediately. If Margaret could have him declared mentally incompetent, she would gain complete control over his assets, his medical care, and his legal affairs. You won't get away with this, he said. I already have, darling. By the time you're released from psychiatric care, if you're released, all the asset transfers will be finalized. Rivera Construction will be sold, and you'll be a powerless old man dependent on my generosity for basic survival. She turned to me with cold fury. And you, Elena, will be facing charges for elder abuse and attempted fraud. I'll testify that you manipulated a sick man, isolated him from proper medical care, and tried to coerce him into changing his will in your favor. It was a brilliant strategy. Evil, but brilliant. She was using the legal system's protections for vulnerable adults as weapons against the people she was actually victimizing. But Margaret had made one crucial error. She had revealed her intentions before securing her position. That's an interesting plan, Mom, I said calmly, but there's something you don't know. I pulled out my phone and played a recording from our conversation 3 minutes earlier. You're making a terrible mistake, David. Both of you. You have no idea what I'm capable of when people try to hurt me. Alina, darling daughter, you've made this much more difficult than it needed to be. I was prepared to let you have your $50,000 and walk away quietly, but now you've forced me to protect myself. Margaret's face went white as she heard her own voice admitting to deception and making threats. You recorded me? I've been recording you for years, Mom. Every threat, every admission, every example of psychological manipulation. I have hundreds of hours of evidence. I played another clip. Let me make something very clear. This family has a hierarchy. Your father and I are at the top. You are not. You will never be. And if you try to change that dynamic, if you try to manipulate him against me, I will destroy you so completely that you'll beg me to forgive you. My father stared at the phone, hearing his wife's voice making calculated threats against his daughter. There's more, I continued. Financial records, medical documentation, testimony from witnesses, evidence of your previous fraudulent relationships. I have enough evidence to send you to prison for elder abuse, fraud, theft, and possibly murder. Margaret was trapped, but she was also desperate. Desperate people are dangerous. None of that will matter if David is declared incompetent, she said. The recordings could be dismissed as manipulation of vulnerable adult. The financial evidence could be explained as legitimate healthcare and estate management. You have theories and accusations. I have 30 years of marriage and legal documentation. She was right about the legal challenges we would face. But she was wrong about our preparation. The doorbell rang. Dr. Patterson arriving to evaluate my father's mental state. Elena, my father said quietly, it's time. I nodded and made a phone call. Marcus, we're ready. Yes, bring everyone. Within 30 minutes, our team had assembled in my parents' living room. Marcus Webb, our attorney. Dr. Patricia Reeves, the independent geriatrician. David Park, the forensic accountant. Dr. Sarah Chen, the psychiatrist. Janet Pierce, the private investigator. Margaret found herself facing a room full of professionals who had spent months documenting her crimes. Dr. Patterson looked confused and overwhelmed. Mrs. Rivera, you said your husband was having a psychiatric crisis, but he seems lucid and appropriate to me. He's been manipulated by his daughter, Margaret said desperately. She's filled his head with paranoid delusions about me. He needs psychiatric evaluation to determine his competency. Dr. Reeves stepped forward. Dr. Patterson, I'm Patricia Reeves, geriatric psychiatry. I've conducted an extensive evaluation of Mr. Rivera's cognitive function and mental health status. He shows no signs of dementia, psychiatric illness, or compromised decision-making capacity. His previous symptoms of confusion and dependency appear to have been artificially induced by inappropriate medication management. She handed Dr. Patterson a comprehensive medical report. His cardiac function is stable and well managed. His mental acuity is excellent. He is fully competent to make his own medical, financial, and legal decisions. Marcus Webb stepped forward next. Dr. Patterson, I'm representing Mr. Rivera in a case involving elder abuse and financial fraud. Mrs. Rivera is currently under investigation for systematic theft of her husband's assets, coercive control, and potential harm to his medical well-being. He handed Dr. Patterson a legal document. This is a restraining order preventing Mrs. Rivera from making any medical decisions on her husband's behalf, accessing his financial accounts, or disposing of family assets. It's been signed by a judge based on evidence of ongoing abuse. Margaret's face cycled through disbelief, rage, and calculation. "This is ridiculous," she said. "David, tell them. Tell them I've been caring for you, protecting you, managing your affairs because you asked me to." My father looked at the woman he had loved for 30 years, the woman who had systematically betrayed and manipulated him, the woman who had been prepared to have him committed to a psychiatric facility to complete her theft of his life's work. "Margaret," he said quietly, "I want you to leave my house. Now." "David, please. We can work this out. I know you're confused, but I love you. Everything I've done has been for our family." "You love my money," he said. "You love my assets. You love the control you've had over my life, but you've never loved me." Margaret looked around the room, seeing her carefully constructed facade crumbling, her legal position collapsing, her escape routes closing. Then she did something I didn't expect. She laughed. It was a cold, genuinely amused laugh that sent chills down my spine. "You think you've won," she said, looking directly at me. "You think you've outsmarted me, outmaneuvered me, exposed my evil plans." She walked to the window, gazing out at the garden she had tended for decades. "But Elena, darling, you still don't understand what you're dealing with. You think I'm some desperate widow who marries men for money. You think I'm an opportunistic manipulator who got caught." She turned back to face us, and her expression was terrifyingly calm. "I'm much more than that. I'm a patient hunter who has been perfecting my craft for 30 years, and you've just forced me to evolve." Margaret walked to her purse, pulled out her cell phone, and made a call. "Detective Morrison? This is Margaret Rivera. I need to report an attempted murder. My husband and daughter have been poisoning me for months, trying to kill me so they can inherit my assets." "Yes, I have evidence. Medical records showing traces of toxins in my blood work, financial documents showing their motive, recorded conversations where they discuss their plans." I stared at her in horror, realizing she was implementing a backup plan, turning our accusations against us with practiced ease. "You see," she said calmly while waiting for the police to arrive, "I've been documenting evidence of your crimes for just as long as you've been documenting mine. The difference is, I'm much better at this game than you are." She showed us her phone, revealing months of recorded conversations, doctored financial documents, fabricated medical reports, all designed to frame my father and me for the exact crimes she had been committing. "The beauty of long-term planning," she continued conversationally, "is that you always prepare for multiple contingencies. Did you really think I spent 30 years setting up this situation without planning for the possibility that you might fight back?" The sirens were getting closer. "So here's what's going to happen. The police are going to arrest you both for attempted murder and elder abuse. I'm going to be the traumatized victim who barely escaped with her life. Slums, your evidence against me will be dismissed as the desperate fabrications of criminals trying to escape justice." Margaret smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression I had ever seen. "And in 6 months, when you're both in prison, I'll inherit everything anyway. David's assets, Elena's professional reputation, the satisfaction of knowing that justice was served." The police knocked on the front door. "Game over," Margaret said softly. "I win." But as the officers entered our living room, something unexpected happened. Detective Morrison, the same detective Margaret had called, walked in accompanied by FBI agents wearing bulletproof vests. "Margaret Rivera," Detective Morrison said, "you're under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, elder abuse, and suspicion of murder in the deaths of Robert Walsh, Thomas Chen, and Michael Rodriguez." Margaret's confident expression cracked. "That's impossible. I called you. I'm the victim here. Mrs. Rivera, we've been investigating you for 8 months based on information provided by the families of your previous victims. Your phone call tonight was recorded, and it constitutes additional evidence of your pattern of false reporting and witness intimidation." The FBI agent stepped forward. "We also have warrants to search this property and seize all financial records, electronic devices, and potentially hazardous substances. This is part of an ongoing federal investigation into serial fraud and suspicious deaths." Margaret looked around the room, finally understanding that she wasn't the only one who had been planning for multiple contingencies. "Elena," she said, her voice deadly quiet, "what did you do?" I didn't just investigate you, Mom. I reported you. To the FBI, to the state attorney general's office, to the insurance companies you defrauded, to the families of the men you killed.
Yeah.
I pulled out another phone, revealing a conference call that had been running throughout our entire confrontation. Everyone heard your confession. The FBI, the district attorney, the detectives investigating your previous victims' deaths. They heard you admit to systematic fraud, manipulation, and planning to have Dad committed to steal his assets. Margaret's face went through a series of expressions: disbelief, rage, calculation, and finally, grudging respect. "You played the long game," she said. "I learned from the best." As the FBI agents led Margaret away in handcuffs, she looked back at me one final time. "This isn't over, Elena. Even from prison, I have resources you don't know about. I have friends who owe me favors. I have information that could destroy people. You think you've won, but you've just made an enemy who will spend the rest of her life finding ways to make you pay." It was her final manipulation, trying to plant seeds of fear that would torment me long after she was gone. But I had learned something important during 30 years of surviving Margaret Rivera. The best way to defeat a predator is to refuse to be prey. "Goodbye, Mom," I said. "I hope you find the help you need." And for the first time in my life, I meant it. 6 months later, my father recovered completely within 3 months of Margaret's arrest. Without the burden of psychological manipulation and inappropriate medications, he returned to his former self, energetic, decisive, and passionate about his work. Rivera Construction was restored to full profitability within 6 months. We expanded the workforce, pursued innovative projects, and rebuilt the relationships Margaret's management company had nearly destroyed. Miguel Santos was promoted to operations manager, and the company culture returned to my father's values of quality craftsmanship and worker respect. Margaret was convicted on multiple federal charges and sentenced to 25 years in prison. The FBI investigation ultimately connected her to 7 suspicious deaths over 30 years, though they could only prove fraud charges. Her assets were seized to provide restitution to her victims' families. Dr. Patterson lost his medical license for failing to report suspected elder abuse and for participating in unnecessary medication protocols. The management company was dissolved after investigations revealed a pattern of deliberately mismanaging family businesses to facilitate below-market sales. I returned to Rivera Construction as Vice President of Operations, working alongside my father to build the company into something even stronger than before. We established a foundation to provide resources for elder abuse victims and their families, ensuring that other people would have the support I had needed to fight back against manipulation. My father updated his will again, but this time I was present for every discussion with the attorney. The new will reflect his true wishes. I inherit the construction business, with provisions to ensure that long-term employees share in its success. The house and other assets are divided between various family members and charitable organizations. But more importantly, my father and I rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. We talk openly about Margaret's manipulation, about the warning signs we should have recognized, about the importance of protecting vulnerable people from predators who disguise abuse as care. 3 months ago, I received a letter from Margaret in prison. I didn't open it. Instead, I forwarded it to the FBI agents handling her case, in case it contained threats or evidence of ongoing criminal activity. I learned that true victory over a manipulator isn't proving them wrong or making them pay for their crimes. True victory is building a life they can't touch, relationships they can't poison, and peace they can't destroy. Margaret Rivera spent 30 years teaching me that family loyalty can be weaponized, that love can be faked, and that trust can be exploited. But she also taught me something she never intended. She taught me that survival is possible, that justice is worth fighting for, and that the strongest people are those who refuse to become what damaged them. Today, I'm 32 years old. I run a successful construction company with my father. I have healthy relationships built on honesty and mutual respect. I use my experience to help other abuse survivors recognize manipulation and reclaim their power. And every morning when I wake up, I'm grateful for one simple truth. Margaret Rivera no longer has any power over my life. That's the only victory that matters. The end.